So here we are. The land that makes up our Devonshire Park is shown on this map by William Figg of 1817. And if you look at down there, little red blob, there is our Wish Tower. And as we all know, the Devonshire Park is just inland from the Wish Tower. So we're looking at an area here that in 1817 was stripped fields. And William Figg's map shows clearly the layout of Eastbourne, except actually it doesn't, because the village of Eastbourne, or as we now call it, Old Town, is way off the map. So here we have the village of Southbourne. Here we have a little hamlet called Sea Houses. Up here we have a little hamlet called Meads. But way off the map up there is the village of Eastbourne. So the point is, Eastbourne developed on very much an agricultural estate with a few hamlets. And that's why William Figg's map is so important to us. But over here is the important thing as far as the Devonshire Park is concerned, because that is Compton Place, the seat of the Cavendish family. And here we have a rather nice view of Compton Place that was remodelled by famous architect Colin Campbell in 1726 for Lady Elizabeth Compton, Lady Betty Compton, who had married Lord George Cavendish, the third son of the fourth Duke of Devonshire. And that is why this house came into the Cavendish family. Now, William Cavendish inherited the house in 1834, and William Cavendish was to become the seventh Duke of Devonshire, who, as we all know, developed Eastbourne. So we now move on a little bit to the early development plans of William Cavendish before he became the seventh Duke of Devonshire. He was then the second Earl of Burlington. And in case you haven't heard this, we could actually be living, or you could be visiting, if you're visitors, a town called Burlington. It was a close thing. It was going to be called Burlington, but then for a reason that not many people know, and I don't, it was changed to Eastbourne, taking the name of the main village of Eastbourne, which is inland of where the Devonshire Park and the main development proposals now stand. So this map here shows the arrangements of the estate of the Earl of Burlington, Eastbourne, and it's by a very famous architect, Decimus Burton. And Burton's name is on the bottom there. So once again, why do I show you this? What's it got to do with Devonshire Park? Well, it's all the background of why the Devonshire Park came into being. And this plan of 1838 is quite interesting. The only building of this proposal by Decimus Burton that was actually built was this little bright red blob there, which is the Chapel of Ease, called Holy Trinity Chapel, which is now Holy Trinity Church. Quite interesting to see this plan. Burton envisaged large villas on a new road system. There's an old seaside road coming down here, so that was a fairly old road, now called Trinity Trees. And this early plan by Burlington was the first of William Cavendish's proposals for the development of his estate in Eastbourne, the estate of Compton Place. He also, of course, owned a huge amount of land in other parts of the country. And this is all before he became the seventh Duke of Devonshire, inheriting from his second cousin, Chatsworth House, in 1858. So before all that, he still owned various country estates, including a big estate up at Holker Hall. And it was at Holker Hall that the Earl of Burlington made his money with the development of Barrow-in-Furness, the Devonshire docks, and the shipbuilding industries up there. He was a man of means before he became the seventh Duke of Devonshire. But here is our little chapel. You probably recognise it, but it has actually been largely rebuilt with its rather nice little Gothic pinnacle tower. And in the background is, in fact, Compton Place, or a little artist's impression of it. So we look at that. We look at this very famous architect, Decimus Burton, who had designed the Athenaeum Club in London, the Marble Arch, the Hyde Park screen, an international architect of repute. And here he is developing the Earl of Burlington's estate down in Eastbourne. And I'll show you this one because it has a relevance with one of the buildings, as you probably know which one I'm talking about, at the Devonshire Park. This is the palm house at Kew Gardens by Decimus Burton of 1844. A magnificent glass and iron palm house built in Kew, and one of the first major glass structures in the world. At the time it was built, it was the largest structure. Up at Chatsworth House, we have the 6th Duke of Devonshire, who was living there. And at that time, he employed Decimus Burton and a designer and engineer, Richard Turner, to design this incredible great stove. It was a giant conservatory. This is 1836, and if I just show you there, that's a man. So you can see there's a man, and that's the size of this incredible great stove. And whilst Decimus Burton was working on this building, he had a pupil called Henry Curry. Now, Henry Curry was an architect, and in those days you didn't go to architectural college. You were normally trained by a very famous architect, if you could get one. And due to the Curry's connections, and Decimus Burton in particular, working for the 6th Duke, Henry Curry trained under Decimus Burton at the time that this incredible conservatory was being built. But this is the 7th Duke. So the 7th Duke of Devonshire, William Cavendish, born in 1808 and died in 1891. He was the one of the finest flowers of the Victorian nobility. And he'd inherited, as I told you before, 1834, the Compton Place in Eastbourne from his grandfather. And he became the 7th Duke of Devonshire in 1858, when the 7th Duke died childless. And he employed, from 1858 onwards, the architect that I've mentioned previously, Mr. Henry Curry. Now, Curry was came from a very wealthy family called Curry. His father, Benjamin Curry, was the legal advisor to the 6th Duke at Chatsworth. And in fact, Curry and Company, a large London solicitors' practice, still exists to this day and is still connected to Eastbourne. For example, they were the solicitors for the marina. Quite an interesting handing down of families throughout the generations. He was trained at Eton, and he was responsible for a number of quite important buildings in the country, including St Thomas's Hospital in London, opened by Queen Victoria. And so we have in Eastbourne, Henry Curry, laying out a portion of the property of the 7th Duke of Devonshire for building purposes. Before he came down to Eastbourne, though, he had been involved not only in the palm house at Kew and the Chatsworth stove, but in this conservatory at Chiswick. This was taken before its restoration, actually. It was very dilapidated, but that was a Henry Curry conservatory building. And very much involved in glasshouse construction in the day. This is the Crystal Palace, of course, by Joseph Paxton, just to show you the sort of iron and glass buildings that were being built in the country at that time. But way back down on the coast at Eastbourne, we have this first design for the laying out of a portion of the property of His Grace the Duke of Devonshire for building purposes. And here it is. And this is a proposal for a development on the estate of the Duke of Devonshire. Remember, he was only 1 year into the job of 7th Duke when this plan was produced. So this is 1859 plan, and you could use it as a map to find your way around nowadays. Here is Devonshire Place. That's where the Duke's statue now stands. An 80-foot wide tree-lined boulevard bisecting the old seaside road, which is here, And we have the church already built by Decimus Burton, Holy Trinity there. There's a square here with a church in the middle of it. That's where St Saviour's Church is now, but St Saviour's actually is positioned slightly differently. And down here, off the map, and we get to the point, is where Devonshire Park was going to be. Not for a few years yet. We also have a local figure coming onto the scene, and this is our first mayor, George Ambrose Wallace. And George Ambrose Wallace was introduced to the Duke of Devonshire by Henry Currie, his architect, and he became not only the chairman of the local board, but later on, after the incorporation of the borough, he became the town's first mayor. He also ran his own building company, Wallace and Wallace, and he was the local agent of the Duke of Devonshire. Wonderful mix of professions and titles. And in his office in Seaside, Old Seaside, he had interchangeable writing paper. So that, in fact, George Wallace, as the local agent, could approve building plans put forward by his company, Wallace and Wallace, and also could give approval being chairman of the local board and later the mayor. That's how you got things done. So, in 1872, we have a further development proposal by Henry Currie for laying out a further portion of the property of His Grace the Duke of Devonshire for building purposes, 1872. Hope you can see this. It's not quite such a colourful plan as the 1859 one. But what is quite interesting about it is the rapidly expanding resort of Eastbourne. These black buildings have already been built in accordance with the earlier 1859 plan. Here's Devonshire Place, with the villas already built. Some of these still exist. You have the terrace of 1851, of Cornfield Terrace, already building. And then you've got Hyde Gardens laid out and all these things being built. St Saviour's Church of 1867, but without the tower and spire, which haven't been added. You've got the formation of Eastbourne College. All these ingredients for a high-class residential estate, Eastbourne. And the idea was that it was going to be a very high-class seaside resort. In fact, the highest class seaside resort in the country. And Eastbourne has been said to be a town built by a gentleman for gentlemen. And this was the Duke's intention. However, there was no central entertainment area. This little area here is, in fact, where Devonshire Park is. So the interesting thing is that even as late as 1872, we have no intention to build a central park or an entertainment area. So why was there a change? Well, the Duke of Devonshire had inherited Chatsworth House in 1858, as well as many other houses in Ireland and up and down the country, Lismore Castle in Ireland and so on. And the Duke said, I've got more houses than I know what to do with. Poor chap. But in Eastbourne, he was wondering what to do to promote his new town. He had already managed to persuade the London, Brighton and South Coast Railway to extend their branch line from Lewes to Hastings down to what he hoped would be an outstanding resort way back in the 1840s. So he'd managed to do that as the Earl of Burlington. But you notice here that whereas all these proposed buildings right up to Meads on the land here, there was still no centre. Now, up in Derbyshire, he had managed to develop the town of Buxton, and he had produced the Buxton Pavilion Gardens up there and found that they were very successful and attracted people to Buxton. And this gave the Duke and his agent and architect Currie and the local agent George Wallace, the big three in the development of Eastbourne, the idea of producing a park. And that's just a close-up showing, once again, the outline. This actually is quite a marshy bit of ground, It used to flood a lot, and one of the first things they had to do was to get rid of all the water. They used a pneumatic pump, Schoen's patent ejector system, to drain this marshy area just southeast of Eastbourne College. There's Wish Road, an old path coming down through the middle of Devonshire Park as it now is. And in fact, the Duke, the 8th Duke, said that he remembered as a child walking through from Compton Place down to the sea through fields of waving corn. This probably was the footpath that the 8th Duke remembered as a child, coming right the way down here, down to the sea. But suddenly, we have a complete change. Here we have the Devonshire Park cricket ground formed in that area that I've just shown you. And this plan, Ordnance Survey map, and 1876 shows us this very interesting development from building site to a cricket ground. Here we have the Devonshire Baths shown. And as you see, no winter garden, no buildings yet on the site. But already the idea that it wasn't totally a park, it was a sports ground. Cricket ground here, croquet ground here, another croquet ground there, and then this interesting little area here with a planting which was called a sycamore grove. The last sycamore tree was felled last year, but it was a screen so that there could be an area for a bandstand. And we'll come to that later. So this 6-inch to the mile map, 1874, shows this park. And first proposed in an article in 1873 in the Eastbourne Chronicle, talks about the old cricket ground being moved from Turners Road to an 11.5-acre site near Eastbourne College. So that was the first mention of the change from 1872 plan to 1873 in the Eastbourne Chronicle in November of that year. And things were moving apace. We have this wonderful picture, it's not brilliantly clear, but in the foreground we have the scaffold poles up for the building of the Grand Hotel, and we're looking across to the Lombardo-Venetian tower of the Devonshire Baths. And the baths were designed by George Ambrose Wallace. As well as a builder, he was no mean architect. The Devonshire Baths were designed by Wallace, who also designed later the Heritage Centre, which I'll show you later, and some other very large properties in Eastbourne. So the baths opened on the 1st of April 1874, and in the tower here were tanks of water, 1,000-gallon tanks, very clever bit of design. To the left, you can see under construction the pavilion of the winter gardens, and lower level the recently completed floral hall of the winter gardens, and here is the park. And you can see the whole place is a massive building site. It was probably a bit like the low-lying ground in Seaford. You can see the chalk that's been brought in to build up the roads, because all the roads around Devonshire Park are built up on chalk that was excavated from the Western Parades extension. When we walk up to the bottom of Beachy Head, up to Holywell, and we walk along the parades there, nothing was wasted. The chalk from there was moved by a little miniature railway down to build up the level of the roads, and that's what this is, banks of chalk. And of course that modelled the whole thing. So you've got the original low-lying marshy ground with all the roads around it built up on embankments of chalk. And this shows the elevation of the old baths. Opened on July the 1st, 1874. The large pool was 111 foot long by 32 foot wide, and that was a gentleman's pool. The small pool was the same length, but only 23 foot wide. I suppose ladies must be slightly slimmer. But the sexes were rigidly kept apart. Once you went through the front entrance door and paid your money, ladies went to the left and gentlemen went to the right. And you didn't see your partner until the end of your swim. Quite right. There's a section through that shows the baths. So there's this incredible tower, which doubled up as a chimney from 3 enormous Lancashire boilers. And this was developed, first of all, by a private company, the Devonshire Baths Company. Local men who wanted to promote swimming and well-being in the town. But very soon after, the Duke of Devonshire got involved and became one of the directors of the Devonshire Baths Company, which was then renamed the Devonshire Park and Baths Company. So the Duke becomes a major shareholder. And those of you who remember the Devonshire Baths and how long it was might think, actually, wasn't it a bit longer than 111 feet? Well, actually, it was so successful that after only 1 year, the gentleman's pool was extended to 150 feet in 1876. So the section here is the gentleman's pool, here's the ladies' pool, and here is the whole baths complex with the Turkish baths, the private baths. In other words, you pay, most houses didn't have a bath, so you paid to go and hire out a little cubicle with a bath. You had the spiral staircase leading up to the director's room, and above that you had hot and cold tanks of water serving this complex. But it is a saltwater, or was a saltwater pool, or 2 saltwater pools, and at high tide you could fill the tanks through a sand filter, and at low tide, not every day, but a few times a year, the water was let out at low tide so that the water could be refreshed. Very clever system, all done by gravity via a pipe underneath Grand Parade. And I can remember well playing at the end of the pipe, I'm sure some of you can, at low tide, playing on the cast iron pipe that stuck out across the beach there. And as you see on this plan, here are the Winter Gardens. So, the Winter Gardens. Eastbourne's Devonshire Park opened in July the 1st, 1874, as a cricket ground, as I've already shown you. And soon proposals were afoot for putting an amazing glass and iron building on the site. And the first mention of the Winter Garden appears in the 7th Duke's diary, and that was on the 6th of May 1874, when he said, "I had a long talk with Curry and his brother Henry and Insole about some Eastbourne matters, chiefly about putting up a building of the same kind as the pavilion in the Buxton Gardens." Now, Buxton already had a big glass conservatory, and so the Duke decided he would do exactly the same thing in Eastbourne. And this building was designed by Henry Curry, his architect, and the lower level floral hall, which is what you all know is still called the floral hall down here, which had a glass roof and conservatory type walls which could be thrown open into the park, was a banqueting hall, but also a roller skating rink. And these people here have all got their roller skates on, and there was a big outside roller skating rink, and people could glide from outside to the inside and listen to Herr Wolf's band playing up in the gallery. And it was opened by the inventor of the roller skate, J.C. Plimpton. So originally roller skates were called Plimpton skates. You can see perhaps the similarity of built form, the roof shapes, with the earlier farmhouse at Kew. Quite interesting, you've got this round barrel vaulted roof for the floral hall, and you've got a square ended hipped roof for the upper level pavilion. And the floral hall was opened in November 1875, before the upper level was completed, as we saw in that photograph looking across from just above the Grand Hotel. The pavilion was opened in July the 8th, 1876, and the pavilion was opened as a concert hall. And the Duke of Devonshire founded an orchestra, the Duke of Devonshire's Eastbourne Orchestra, to play in that building, and it became the first symphonic-sized orchestra in the country. We still could have had a symphony orchestra, but Bournemouth kept theirs on, and we didn't. There's the inside of the floral hall. Magnificent iron and glass structure, but also with zinc panels, so it was semi-glazed, really. The original intention was that it should be completely glazed, but I think there was a change made soon after that, and so there were panels of zinc by a French company, and all the panels had decoration, cast iron columns, no wet trades above floor level. It was a kit of parts bolted together, timber beams, wrought iron trusses, and a very elegant, light and airy structure with a gallery where you've got the band playing to the skaters gliding around below. Lots of plants and palms. And the Illustrated London News of 1881 said that the floral hall, like a miniature crystal palace, wore the appearance of one of the enchanted palaces to be read of in the Arabian Nights. But there it is, another view, looking up to Earp's Folly in the background here. Newly built St John's Church, 1869. Here is the skating rink, and here are people enjoying a cricket match in the cricket ground. So it was always, the Devonshire Park, going to be a combination of park and sports ground. And that sort of conflict still exists today. One feels when you're entering the Devonshire Park that maybe you shouldn't be there, it's a sports ground. But this combination of these two different things was always part of the joy of the park. This was in the Eastbourne Gazette of November the 4th, 1874. And what it said is, from time to time we have made our readers acquainted with this project of the building of the Winter Garden. And we now have the satisfaction of informing them that the building is now in the course of erection from the plans of Mr. Henry Curry. And the building measures 150 foot each way, and the height to the summit of the central vane is 85 feet. It contains a large winter garden, skating rink, 150 foot long by 50 foot, laid with an asphalt floor by Mr. Pilkington, refreshment saloons, billiard rooms, concert hall, and the whole thing built by the principal of Messrs. Fletcher and Louds. So another early shot of the floral hall, and interestingly enough, this is the end facing west, which originally didn't have a veranda around it. You can see that the park is just outside, and the veranda came a little bit later. Here is a view of the concert hall in the upper level pavilion, and you can see how basic a structure it was, with all the structure exposed and expressed. Very simple match-boarded timber walls, tubular wrought iron columns, enlivened with some stripy decoration like a Venetian pole on the waterfront. And then here was Eastbourne's chief entertainment stage for orchestras. Outside, an early photograph here shows people taking tea on the rink. Quite a nice little shot. And once again, the veranda stopped here, and the roof came straight down onto the ground, and later on the veranda was built out as it exists today. Fletcher and Louds' patent tubular roofing system was also used on the winter gardens at Bournemouth, but they've been demolished, and the winter garden at Eastbourne is now a very rare building type of a Victorian winter garden. And it's going to be partly restored at the front as part of the current refurbishment and redevelopment works, as long as there's enough money for it at the end of the project. So it's the end of the list, which is always slightly worrying. Some views that we drew up, my practice drew up, when there was a consideration of the restoration of the building. That was in 1987. That's the side view. That's the view to the park with the Minstrels Gallery. And that's the view to the road. And this double pitch roof here should be reconstructed as part of the current Devonshire Park improvement works. And I hope it is. At the moment, there's a really rather ugly 1960s elevation here, which is all falling apart, and the glass panels are about to fall out. The proposal is to reconstruct this pitched roof. But it has developed, this building. Originally, the front entrance was only a single-storey building, and the upper parts were bolted on later. And this is the sort of decoration when the roof was refurbished about 15 years ago, and we researched into the sort of ironwork decoration that the roof would have had. This is the ridge frieze, and this is the main balustrade around the turrets, and they're in cast iron by Walter McFarlane and Company, based on the original patterns, and other things such as the flagpole and weathervane. So we're very lucky in Eastbourne to have our winter garden. It's now a Grade 2 listed building, and we very much look forward to seeing it enhanced. But that was, of course, not the only building. In 1884, we have a magnificent theatre built, the Devonshire Park Theatre, designed once again by Henry Currie, so that's his second major building on the site, in the Italianate style, with two Italianate towers flanking the central block. And once again, rather like the Baths Tower, they're not just decorative. Behind here and here were two enormous water tanks, because one of the great fears in Victorian theatres was fire. And the theatre was gaslit, and the stage was gaslit, and in the event of a fire, hydrants and a series of pipes with sprinklers could be employed from these water tanks, which gave the necessary pressure to get the fire put out rather quickly. Below the tanks, non-combustible staircases. There had been a theatre fire just before 1884, and everybody was looking at ways of getting out of theatres quickly. And these are non-combustible staircases so that you could get out very quickly and go right the way down to the bottom and out without going through the main entrance foyer. Lovely little theatre, very Italianate, and that was by Henry Currie, but it was remodelled by a very famous theatre architect, Frank Matcham, just after the turn of the century in 1905. Modern view of the theatre, but actually since this picture was taken, there's been some embellishments. The spikes or finials on the roof of the turrets have been put back, and the entrance has all been redecorated. And for my sins, I was involved in that, so like it or love it, that I was involved in that particular bit of work, which was great fun. I love this theatre. Here is an interior shot showing the remodelling by Frank Matcham. The original interior of the theatre was actually quite classical, quite square. The galleries existed, but these boxes here, with all this decoration here, is Matcham's work, later work of 1905. Now, in the park itself, apart from the cricket, was tennis, because Eastbourne Devonshire Park Club was one of the earliest tennis clubs in the world, and in fact it was founded before the All England Club. Very important tennis ground. Other things happened as well, such as the Eastbourne Cycling Academy, And here is the ladies group. Here they all are on their safety bicycles, riding around the outside part of the park. In the background is the newly completed side of the Devonshire Park Theatre. But also in the background here is this rather nice structure, a miniature temple. And that was built for the Workman's Fair in 1885 by a local plasterer, Mr. Hookham, James Hookham. And the family still exists in Eastbourne. And it was relocated a year later in 1886 to the edge of the park. And as you can see, the walk above had a beautiful balustrade. All this has gone now. And the temple itself survived until 1981, when the rusting metal at the top meant that it became unstable. And it was taken down, and the Eastbourne Society campaigned to have it put up. The pieces were on the ground for about 15 years, and then overnight they amazingly disappeared. Hand drawing of the miniature temple. And from this it would be quite easy to reconstruct the temple. And the thought is that it could form a very nice little wedding venue, because quite a lot of weddings now take place in the park and the floral hall, and this would be a very nice place to have the bride and groom photographed. Amazing events took place in the park. This is 1895. The Carnation Balloon at the Schools Bazaar, which took place in the park in 1895 between the 25th and 26th of June. This was a massive balloon, as you can see, filled by town gas. Goodness me. I hope nobody was smoking that. But anyway, that was it, and you could get into the basket, pay for your ride, and go up 1,000 foot and get a magnificent view of the town and surrounding area. Inside the upper level pavilion is the Duke of Devonshire's orchestra. And this chap here, a cellist, here he is, was very famous cellist Charles Wesley Woodward, who later in 1912 joined the Titanic and was one of the hero musicians who went down with the Titanic playing until she sank. And of course there is a memorial to Wesley Woodward in the Bandstand on the seafront. You've probably seen it, but if you haven't, it's at the back on the level of the Bandstand, and you can see that memorial by a local sculptor, Wesley Garrard. That's the same picture with all the orchestra signing it. That's why it's not a very good picture, but it's really interesting for the signatures. And here he is, Wesley Woodward, the cellist. Another very notable building, and that was built for the Devonshire Park and Baths Company, the Buccaneer. Now, the Buccaneer Public House was designed by a Hastings architect, and he was Mr. Ward, Henry Ward of Hastings, in 1897, and it was originally called the Devonshire Hotel. Delightful building, and it took its cue from the Indian Pavilion. The Indian Pavilion was a large pavilion re-erected in the park by the P&O company from an exhibition they'd had at Hyde Park in London. It was re-erected in Eastbourne, called the Indian Pavilion. And that's where this took its cue from, the Buccaneer. But it's a very jolly piece of work, lovely pub, and recently reacquired by the Borough Council. Also in the park, there was a bandstand in the Sycamore Grove that I told you about a little earlier. This actually was the second bandstand on the site. The first one was a very simple timber structure, but the later bandstand of 1910 was designed by a local architect, J.W. Woolnough, who actually had extended the Winter Garden stage, a sort of bubble that sticks out into the grounds of the park that you can see today. A huge bandstand. You could fit an orchestra of considerable size, as you can see here. What a brilliant shot. Interesting decoration. These brackets, columns, these Doric columns here, and a tiled roof, a huge bandstand. I've got a better picture of it now, but I thought I would just show you the orchestra inside it. So this nice clear photograph shows you Woolnuff's bandstand. And I expect, as most of you know, that survived until last year, which was very sad. And the Eastbourne Society were really in two minds about whether to fight the demolition of this building or whether it should go ahead. Unfortunately, it had been very badly mutilated and incorporated into other buildings. Not many people actually knew it was there, but it was there. And the main structure was there, but there was no space to put the new players' centre for the tennis. And of course, tennis is vitally important to Eastbourne. And so it was decided to let it go. Careful monitoring and archaeological recording took place, and the brackets here, which were by Baedeker of London, were saved. Before we go on to the next slide showing what might happen to the brackets, on a point of detail, here is a very early barley sugar twist cast iron lighting column. And these supports here supported electric lights. And the Devonshire Park was one of the parks in the country, one of the earliest electric lighting schemes in the country. It was powered by two Siemens generators in the basement of the Devonshire Park, and a wire came across and illuminated the park with electricity on the earlier gas columns. Two of these survived. They were supposed to be carefully taken away and re-erected. Unfortunately, one has been damaged, but hopefully that will be repaired. And the intention is to re-erect these two columns outside the cricket and tennis pavilion, 1920s pavilion, and also in place of the two quite plain timber brackets is to erect two of the brackets from the 1910 bandstand with a board underneath explaining that the brackets come from the earlier bandstand. So we've just got some remnants of the old 1910 bandstand by J.W. Woolnuff, which hopefully will be put up later in the year. Other buildings. We're getting up to date now. 1963, we have the Congress Theatre. And like it or loathe it, this is a very rare example, along with the Festival Hall, of a large theatre in the square plan style, very much a product of the 1960s building, and it was listed in 1998, grade 2 star, which means it's of national importance. The Winter Garden only made it to grade 2, which means it's sort of locally important, but important. And the Devonshire Park Theatre is also grade 2 listed. So this is considered to be, in the park, one of the most important buildings in the park. And it was designed by Brown and Norman Westwood architects, London architects. And it was opened by Princess Margaret. And like the Festival Hall, it is this incredible international style with beautiful staircases which seemingly float. They're not connected to the side walls. They sort of hang there. Like it or loathe it, it's quite an important building for Eastbourne. And these early pictures here show the entrance foyer and cloakroom. There is this staircase with its spines, rather like a fish's skeleton, a sort of skeletal structure, not supported at the sides at all, floating up to the higher levels. We all know it, it's sort of familiar, but it is actually a very important national monument Here's the auditorium with its, once again, a sort of floating ceiling. And all this is being refurbished at the moment. So we very much look forward to seeing what Levitt Bernstein, the architects, make of restoring the Congress Theatre. And when it is opened, we shall see how they've got on. Here is the tennis centre. This structure here, late last century, replacing what was a timber covered stand here to open the whole thing up. And of course, Eastbourne's tennis is now of national importance, international importance really. The whole thing is centred on the St Saviour's spire as a focal point, if you like, and these early villas surrounding the park. Once again, the surrounding land all built up at a higher level, and a rather magnificent tree screen of home oaks. Then we have another award-winning building, which of course is Towner. Amazing now to think that it's 9 years old, 2009, 10 years old, no, 9 years old, by Rick Mather Architects. So here we have our 1960s Congress Theatre with the Towner building, or Towner building, added onto it. And of course that's been very much in the news recently, but there's no doubt it is a great asset to Eastbourne, having a major provincial art gallery. Now we're really getting up to date with the new Players' Pavilion, opened last year by Levitt Bernstein, clad in cedar, and this is on the site of the 1910 Bandstand. Money is being invested. Lawn Tennis Association has helped with this, but also it's, of course, the first big building, first major building of the what they call the Devonshire Centre. And under construction now is this new building next door to the Congress Theatre. This is the new Welcome building. And underneath here, where these people are shown, is an underground conference hall. So the whole of the land here is being built up to form this new conference hall, which is below ground level. But above ground, there is a main entrance, the Welcome building, with cafe, big restaurant at the back, and upper levels for offices. And from the park, this is how it should fit in, with the Winter Garden here and the Congress Theatre here, with a gallery and a terrace, restaurant behind it, steps leading down to the park. Here is J.W. Woolnuff's 1910 extension of the Winter Garden, tacked on to Curry's original work. So we come really to up to date with the new Welcome building. This £35 million development, which is costing a little bit more now. This view of 1875, though, looks back on maybe the beginning of the golden era of the Devonshire Park at the end of the last century. This view of 1875 depicts various very notable buildings in Eastbourne. So in the foreground, just to get our bearings, we've got the Convalescent Hospital, 1867, by a wonderful architect, Henry Woodyer. We've got our pier by Eugenius Birch of 1866, big spire of St Saviour's Church by the architect George Edmund Street of 1867, and the spire was added in 1872. St John's Church, 1869. Here's the Baths Tower, sadly no more, 1874. And here is our Winter Garden, and there is the Devonshire Park. So it's very much in the centre of the development of Eastbourne. And then one building I haven't mentioned is the Eastbourne Society's own Heritage Centre, which was going to be demolished as part of the Devonshire Baths, and the Eastbourne Society, and in particular Ronald Clack and Mavis Clack, fought for the retention of this building. And the council said, well, yes, fine, we can retain it, but what's it going to be used for? Well, Faversham had opened up a heritage centre, and this gave the idea to the Eastbourne Society to open it up as a heritage centre. And it's recently been completely refreshed and remodelled by Nicholas Howell. And if you haven't been in it, because a lot of people don't visit the Heritage Centre, I would really recommend you go and have a look. It's an important building in its own right. It was designed by George Ambrose Wallace, our first mayor. It's often called the Threepenny Bit Building because of its octagonal tower, but it was actually originally called Park Cottage, and it was designed for the manager of the Devonshire Parks and Baths Company. And this view is taken from the front cover of the Devonshire Park catalogue of 1897. And it shows the front of the Winter Garden with its double pitch roofs that we hope will go back very shortly, as long as money is available. And if it isn't, I hope everybody here will urge that to happen, because in my view, it's one of the most important things to put right. Is the front of the Winter Garden really looks awful. We've got the Heritage Centre building, and then behind it, the Baths Tower. So I hope this talk has given you a little bit of an insight into the development of our Devonshire Park. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, well, hello everybody. Since I gave that lecture, a lot has happened in the park, but I thought I'd just show you, if we pan over to the Devonshire Park Theatre, as part of the total refurbishment of the Devonshire Quarter, there's been quite a lot going on in the Devonshire Park. It's had a big remodelling, the entrance foyer has been redecorated. I hope you like the design, because I had a hand in it. Also, the toilets inside have been refurbished in the Victorian style. Give you a total theatrical experience with Thomas Crapper high-level systems. It's quite exciting, if you like that sort of thing. The other thing we had to do, if you pan over there, Chris, to the very top of the turrets there, we reinstated the finials, those spikes on top of the tower, which was quite fun. They're made of copper, and we had to prove that they weren't going to collapse in a force 10 gale. So to do that, I actually strapped one on the top of my car and drove at excess of 70 miles an hour on an occasion to just make sure that they were okay, and they were fine. So those are now bolted to the roof. And then if you pan round, you've got the tower of the Heritage Centre, our Heritage Centre, and the flag flying. And then to the right of that, you've got J.W. Woolnought's extension on the Winter Gardens of 1910. So that's by our local architect, J.W. Woolnough. To the right of that, we've got the newly opened Welcome Building, designed by Levitt-Bernstein, which now is positioned between the Congress Theatre and the Winter Gardens. And I think you'll agree it's, you know, quite a modern addition, but it fits in well with the park, and that now is the main entrance to the Devonshire Quarter complex. It's quite exciting. A brand new entrance, a public cafe, looking out towards the Winter Gardens, and then you find your way down through to the Congress Theatre. And at the back of the Congress Theatre, I don't know if you can pick it up in this light, but there's some decoration on the bricks there by Eric Peskett, and that's quite modern. Now the whole of the Congress Theatre has been refurbished once again by Levitt-Bernstein architects, and includes new heating and new air conditioning. Before it was very uncomfortable in the auditorium, and a reconstruction of the early 1960s light fittings, which is very exciting. So a complete refurbishment of the building to bring it up to use, but also reflecting its heritage, because of course it was opened in 1963 by Princess Margaret, as I think was shown on my original lecture. But the actual first design was 1958, so it took quite a long time for the project to be realised. And it's now a grade 2-star listed building, which is the only grade 2-star listed building in the park. The Winter Gardens grade 2, the Devonshire Park's grade 2. But our Congress Theatre is a 2-star building, which is quite good for a 1960 building. So it shows how important it is. And then if you pan round, we've got our Towner Art Gallery by Rick Mather. Now, sadly, Rick Mather's passed away. I'm not quite sure what he'd think of the new artwork that's been painted on it, but I like it. I think it's very dramatic. It's only temporary in actual fact, but rather like the London Eye, I suspect it may last a bit longer than the original permission. So, looking behind me, we have the new tennis centre, once again by Levitt-Bernstein architects. It's been open for a couple of years now. But that took the place of the old bandstand of 1910, once again by J.W. Woolnough, who did the extension to the Winter Gardens. And out of that came 2 or 3 brackets from the original bandstand, which one has to say was covered up by a fives and squash court, so you couldn't really see the bandstand. But we did want to keep remnants of it. So the brackets have now been replaced on the 1910 tennis pavilion, and those are in place, and there's going to be a notice board underneath to say that that's where the brackets came from and have been reinstated for posterity, hopefully. So panning round, we've got the Point, which was an office building, about 20 years old now, I suppose. And then if you pan round again, you've got this rather nice tennis pavilion by William Hay Murray, who did a lot of work in Eastbourne. So that tennis pavilion of 1910, with the new brackets supporting the bay windows from the old tennis centre. We're now outside the tennis pavilion by W. Hay Murray, and the plans for this were recently discovered in our office archives, which is quite interesting. So we have the original plans for this building. And William Hay Murray was a very important local architect, and he produced the designs for the tennis pavilion. But actually what we've got up here are the reused brackets salvaged from the 1910 bandstand by Mr. Woolnough, who did the extension of the Winter Gardens. And we've relocated those as basically a little keepsake of the original bandstand, which was the second bandstand in the park. and the original bandstand was a timber frame building, and then it was replaced by a 1910 quite solid structure, which then became part of the complex of squash courts. So you could hardly see the bandstand, which is why when great discussions took place about the new tennis centre, it was felt that it was really important to get rid of the old bandstand to create room. But we've got some vestige of it, which is quite attractive. So here we have the tennis centre, the International Lawn Tennis Centre, that was designed by Sports Partner Limited. It's about 20 years old now, and it was built on the site of the old timber centre court structures. And it's now a centre enclosing our centre court, an international venue for tennis, which is a wonderful thing for Eastbourne. Lawn tennis was played at Eastbourne just about the same time as Wimbledon was created, so we go back an awful long way at the same time as Wimbledon. And we're now one of the most important tennis centres in the country, if not the world. So here we are looking across to the centre court in the Devonshire Park, and a sort of focal point behind it, you might want to pen in on it, is the 1872 spire of St Saviour's Church by George Edmund Street. But this site here was the old wooden centre court stands, and they were replaced about 30 years ago by the new tennis centre, and this is the centre court of that complex. So we're now at the latest thing in the Devonshire Park, which is this amazing mural painting by Lothar Goetz, and it's called Dance Diagonal. And this painting is the largest work of Goetz to date, and it was sponsored by our local brewers, decorators, on the 10th anniversary of Towner Gallery, which was designed by Rick Mather. Now, Rick Mather sadly has died. I'd wonder what he thinks of this incredible artwork on his building. I think he'd probably like it, but it is incredibly dramatic. It's supposed to be short term, but I suspect it's quite well loved now, and I suspect it may be here for many, many more years than the temporary few years it was supposed to be up. We'll see. So I do hope you've enjoyed this update on the Devonshire Park, and as it's now called, the Devonshire Quarter, and that you'll come and visit the theatres, wonderful theatres we have, and this fabulous Towner Gallery with its dynamic new painting by Lothar Goetz, and inside wonderful collections including works by Eric Ravilius, who was at Eastbourne Art School. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.